Father Greg Boyle interview. Take one, marker.
I'm Greg Boyle, and I'm the founder of Homeboy Industries.
Father Greg, as I know a lot of people call you, or Father G, you quoted a 7th century prophet, I'm going to say it wrong, Habakkuk, about vision. I'd love to start with that quote and that citation and why that was important to you to talk about.
Yeah, so the prophet Habakkuk writes, "For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it."
Why is that so much a part of your personal philosophy? Because it seems to inform this greater patience in working with the people with whom you work. Patience has to be not just a virtue but a necessity.
Yeah, I think the prophet Habakkuk speaks about a vision above all that will happen and come to be. And so and it will be fulfilled. And so you're waiting in joyful hope for that to happen. So and if you have a confidence that this will happen and that love will prevail, or however you envision the vision, then it's easy to be patient with it and to wait, and you wait for people to kind of come to their own sense of inhabiting their truth and love, and that takes time, and you just cherish people into that consciousness where they see it and feel it and live from it.
It seems to me that the essence of that is in believing that there is no such thing as a bad person. It's someone who hasn't yet seen their own goodness and seen the way that they should or can see themselves. Do you believe that all people have a spark of the divine, of goodness in them?
Yeah, I'll answer that by telling a brief little story. I was at the LA Times Festival of Books. I was on a panel with a rabbi and a columnist, and I was saying that the two principles that are kind of foundational that we hold here at Homeboy is everyone is unshakably good. There are no exceptions. And we belong to each other, and there are no exceptions. And then I asked the crowd, I said, do I think that all our vexing, complex social dilemma that need our addressing would simply go away if we embrace those two foundational notions? And I paused, and then I said, yeah, I do. And the entire audience burst into laughter, which kind of startled me. And when the laughter subsided, I said quietly, yes, I do. And I do. And I think gang members have taught me that for 40 years, that everybody's unshakably good. Now, there's some things that block the view, a despair that's dark, or trauma that's enormous, or real mental illness. But none of it touches their goodness. Their goodness is intact. So the idea is, how do you find it?
You grew up in Los Angeles. Talk about growing up. You were one of 8 kids.
I was born in Los Angeles, and I have 5 sisters and 2 brothers, and in effect, I was born in, and lived in the gang capital of the world. But there was no chance that I would ever join a gang. I mean, I won all the lotteries, parents and zip code and education. And so there was no chance that I'd ever join a gang, but which has nothing to do with morality, more with location and being privileged. So yeah, so I grew up in this city.
Talk about your parents.
Yeah, well, my father died when he was 70, which was many years ago, maybe 30 plus. And my mother died just a handful of years ago at 92. And they were terrific parents, people of their generation, who expressed emotion and in a way that generation did, which was strong and silent. You knew that you were loved, but there wasn't the kind of affectionate, demonstrable displays like like maybe we're more used to in subsequent generations, but they were kind of rock solid guiding lights.
Were you raised in a faith-based environment? Was the church important in your growing up?
Yeah, we were 2 blocks from our parish church, and the 10 of us would walk to church, and it was like a Norman Rockwell painting. It was like 2 by 2, and yeah, we had Sunday best and that whole thing.
Where were you in the birth order?
I'm number 4 out of 8.
As you're growing up, there comes a time in life where you sort of see a path for yourself. You chose to pursue it. How did that happen? How were you drawn to it? How was it your calling?
Well, I was educated by the Jesuits, and I found that they had this combo burger of, joy and fearlessness. So they were hilariously funny, and they were prophetic. Especially in those days, it was, the Vietnam War, and so to watch them be so out there in terms of their protest. And I was drawn. I entered the Jesuits in many ways because of Daniel Berrigan. I never knew him, but I remember seeing the trial of the Catonsville Nine at the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles, and it was powerful. I thought, yeah, I'll have what he's having, and so that's kind of what happened. I mean, it's kind of superficial, but it grows into something deeper, of course. But
when you decided that you were going to pursue becoming a Jesuit, a lot of this is training and time, and I know you have multiple degrees, a degree in philosophy and English from Gonzaga. So you were studying philosophy, which is both divine and very secular. Did you know then that you were interested in the priesthood when you were an undergraduate?
Well, I studied at Gonzaga and Loyola Marymount during the time that I was a Jesuit. So I wasn't yet ordained a priest. So I was ordained in '84. So, it was like 10 years into, 10, 13 years maybe, can't remember, into entering the Jesuits, that you study philosophy, theology, and then you're ordained a priest. Being a Jesuit is kind of the thing for me. You can become a priest or not, but, following the charism of St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, that was the thing that drew me. And then priesthood is, sort of an option, that's contained within that other vow, that other vocation.
So to the Jerry Brown of it all, you were attracted to the humor and the fierceness. Obviously, Jerry brought those qualities into public life.
Jerry's a friend, and so, he's older than I am, so he entered at a different kind of time. But again, he entered the Jesuits, took vows as a Jesuit, and then you take first vows after 2 years, and then you take final vows, sometime later. But somewhere in there, usually 10 to 13 years in, you are trained to then be ordained as a priest in the Catholic Church.
And so you're an undergraduate and in graduate school, still going through that process. That is it's part of the path. And this is to someone uninitiated. I didn't understand that part of it is learning all of those things and then deciding what you want to do with it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's so much deciding. You can decide to be a Jesuit brother, which is to say you don't get ordained to be in a ministerial capacity, but you kind of decide that at some point. You go, yeah, I want to be a Jesuit, but I don't really want to be a priest. So you can do that.
You did decide you wanted to be a priest. Was there a moment? Did you have an epiphanal moment where you knew that this was what you wanted to do?
No, most folks who I entered with, they knew that would be on the path. So you do the studies, you do the philosophy and the theology, and then you're ordained, and then you're assigned somewhere.
And were you assigned to Bolivia? Is that what happened?
Well, I asked to kind of take a year to go learn Spanish right after ordination, so I was there for a year. And then I came back, finished studies, and then I was assigned to Dolores Mission.
Tell me, I've read some, but obviously Dolores Mission was a location in Los Angeles. It determined a lot of the work that you were doing based on where it was, next to the two largest housing projects. Is that right?
Yeah, well, we had two parishes in Los Angeles that were administered by the Jesuits. So we'd been asked many years before if the Jesuits could come in here and do that. So it was the poorest parish in the city, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens, Aliso Village. And and what later evolved, it became the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. So we had 8 gangs in my parish. Initially, the first 2 years, that was not so much an evident thing. But then by '88, it just heated up, and I was burying kids.
I saw at one point that, and this is some time ago, I think, close to 200, and I'm sure that number, this I think was from a speech you gave a decade ago.
Yeah, no, I think 265 is where I am now.
I'm struck, Greg, by the fact that unlike so many people who deliberately send young men and women off to war and never keep count, never keep track, have no idea. These are people that you didn't send into this life, but you're very aware, and you've kept each one very real to you. I'm just struck by that you do know the count.
Yeah, well, part of the reason I counted was because they didn't count. And so, in the early days, it would be, 8 lives in the housing projects were not worth 1 life in Westwood Village. And so that was becoming, ever present and clear to me. So then that started this thing where I kept track, and I have a book, and I write the name and the number. So that kind of evolved over the years, but it was at a time when I was shaking my fist, so they had a gang-related homicide in Westwood Village and near UCLA, and a young woman on a date, and she got caught in the middle of crossfire, gang crossfire. Typically, you wouldn't have gang violence over there, but they did, and the next day, it was assignment of all sorts of patrol officers, and detectives were taken from other cases in the city and applied to this case. And then a huge reward was offered. And then it became clear that 1 life in Westwood was worth, 8, 16, 49 deaths in my parish.
A white blonde life, as opposed to...
that they were worth more. And it was like, gang violence isn't supposed to happen in Westwood Village, but it did.
As you saw this happening, and you were shaking your fist at the fact that people didn't see the rooster crowing against the dawn, you did something about it. You created Homeboy. What brought you to creating this entity that has grown so much? But start from the very beginning.
Yeah, well, the first thing we did was we started a school, because there were so many junior high, middle school age gang members who had gotten the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So in the middle of the day, they were wreaking havoc and selling drugs and writing on the walls, and were violent. So that was the first thing we did. That was kind of the pressing thing. So then I walked out to them, and I would say, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And every single one said, yeah, I would. And then I couldn't find one. So we started one. And so that's kind of how it evolved. It was a kind of an outreach to this population. And then they said, if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women in the parish, which was the profile of housing projects, were basically women with children. And so we marched around the factories that surrounded the projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we just started things, a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rivals, members of these 8 different enemy gangs.
Necessity being the mother of those
Yeah,
inventions.
we just couldn't wait, for employers to say, hey, this is smart on crime if we hired gang members. So we had a slogan in those days, nothing stops a bullet like a job, trying to get employers, and the need was so huge. Every gang member wanted a job. Nobody said, that's okay, I'm okay doing this, And even, gang members who sold drugs, you think, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've made money hand over fist? And yet, every human being wants their mom to be proud and their kids not to be ashamed. So it was not a tough sell.
You told the story of someone named Bandit who was told and thought that he was good for nothing, and finally just came around to being tired of being tired. And it seems like a lot of these kids have grown up not seeing and not having any way of seeing their own worth. That's the first challenge, right? Is getting them to see themselves perhaps the way that God sees them, or the way that exists that they just cannot possibly see it given their circumstance. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I had a conversation not long ago with a homie named Joseph, and I've known him since he was 10 years old. He's now 45 or something. And, his father was a gang member. His father died of a heroin overdose. Joseph has overdosed many times and has never died from it. But so we were finishing a conversation, and he says, I think life is just letting the blindfold fall and removing the blindfold, he said. I think it's just removing the blindfold. And I said, well, what do you see, when the blindfold falls? And he thought for a second, he put his hand on his chest, and he said, goodness. Well, that's the whole idea. We're allergic around here to holding the bar up and asking folks to measure up, We want to show up to them with a mirror and say you're exactly what God had in mind when God made you. There's nothing missing here. And once they know that truth, they become that truth. They inhabit that truth. And indeed, no bullet can pierce it.
You have a phrase that the soul can feel its own worth when you allow it to.
Yeah, it comes from a Christmas carol, long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. And so it's about Jesus and it's about Christmas, but it's really the job description of human beings, who own a pulse. You appear and the soul feels its worth. And so you're not fixing, rescuing, or saving. You're actually, in a counterintuitive way, you're allowing yourself to be reached by people on the margins, and you allow your heart to be altered. And just by that kind of attention and cherishing, then people see what you're seeing. It's a lens. And then they live from their truth. They let love live through them. They find their true selves in loving. So, and you're doing it in each other's presence. So it's not a thing that you transfer to somebody. It's something that happens in an exquisitely mutual way. And then everybody's inhabiting their own dignity and nobility in each other's presence. So it's not a thing I impart to somebody, but it's a thing that together we reveal, and then they see it.
I'm struck by how you have said that over and over again, that you don't rescue people, you don't fix people, you don't pull people out of gangs, you stand with them, and in fact, you are, by being with them in some way, you are more whole as a result of that. And I don't want to paraphrase you, so please say if I've got that right. Is that how you say
Yeah,
it?
I mean, so you talk about the margins, the poor, the powerless, the demonized, the voiceless, the easily despised, the readily left out. All those people who are at the margins. And you go to the margins not to make a difference, which is in every commencement address I've ever heard. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. If you go to the margins to make a difference, then it's about you, and it just can't be about you. So, but then you go there to be made different, and then it becomes about us. There's something that happens in it. This is how people don't burn out, because they go to the margins and they delight in the people they find. So you go where love has not yet arrived, and you love what you find there. And so that just doesn't, that's eternally replenishing. That's never depleting. You're never burning out because you're really delighting in the person right in front of you.
You talk about just that, standing at the margins, placing yourself there to be there, and therefore, to some extent, it's not marginal anymore. You're right in the center of everything.
Well, it's the only way the margins get erased is by enough people going and standing out at them, and then all of a sudden you're together imagining a circle of compassion, and then you're imagining nobody standing outside that circle. So it becomes inclusive and compassionate and filled with unconditional love.
There have been a number of times where I've been blessed to talk to people who've made me see that in ways that I, in the normal course of a day, forget. And a lot of life is just remembering who we are and not getting caught up in all of the distraction and the noise. One of them was Harry Belafonte, another was Elie Wiesel, another was Desmond Tutu. When you're around people like that, you do feel touched by grace. You knew someone like that, Cesar Chavez. Can you talk about Cesar Chavez for a moment?
Cesar Chavez, who was a community organizer, a farm worker organizer, and so I knew him and privileged to know him. And I always say about him that he was the best listener I've ever encountered. I mean, when you were talking to him, nobody else existed but you. He had that ability not to look over your shoulder to see if someone more important was on the approach. His whole being was kind of laser beam focused on you. So he was extraordinary. And a reporter once famously said to him, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And he just shrugged and smiled and said, the feeling's mutual. And I've always loved that because I thought, yeah, the goal is mutuality, not saving the day or even making progress. Though progress is nice, but it's really about we're in this together. And then how do you create a community of cherished belonging? Cherishing people is not hard, but remembering to cherish people is extremely difficult. And so that's kind of where we want to be. The homies here who are in recovery will say, one day at a time. And I always say, no, that's too long. It's like one breath at a time. One breath you cherish with every breath. So systems change when people change, and people change when they are cherished. And so I asked a homie the other day, I said, how are you doing? He goes, I'm just trying to stay love-struck, which I thought was pretty good, that how do you stay love-struck? And how do you, once people discover that loving is their home, they'll never be homesick again, you know. And so then they kind of stay anchored in it. And they let love live through them. And it has nothing to do with return. You know, will I receive love? Just doesn't matter. You know, because if loving is your home, then that's where you stay. That's where you reside. And then you're never homesick. So you're never lamenting. You know, the Tibetans say, you know, wherever you have received the most love, that's your home. And I go, yeah, I guess. But the problem is sometimes you're not home. Now what? Then you're stuck with homesickness. Unless loving is your home. And then it doesn't matter where you are or what you receive. You know, you're just loving. And so Puka, a homegirl here, we all call her Puka, her name is Stephanie, but she says that Homeboy, love is a lens. It's how we see things. And I think it's brilliant. I think that's exactly right. You know, so it's more eyewear than anything else. It's just simply, you know, how you will choose to see things. And then it's liberating. And then the world can throw at you whatever it's going to throw at you. And you're not going to be toppled because loving is your home. And I think that's the answer.
You know, you talked about not forgetting and talked about someone who lived at the margins. Mother Teresa, who you've quoted, famously put herself among the most despised people, lepers. This was where she was most present at the margins, among the least among us and among her people. And the quote that you used of hers is very similar to what you just said. The problem in the world is that we've forgotten that we belong to each other. Can you talk about that idea that we've forgotten that we belong to each other?
This Mother Teresa quote, it turns out I was in Philadelphia, I was on a panel, and I quoted, as I always do, I say the problem in the world, Mother Teresa tells us, is that we've forgotten that we belong to each other. Well, the Philadelphia Inquirer kind of went back and checked it, and the actual quote is something like, you know, if we continue to be at war, you know, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. So then I liked it even more because you could fill in the blank, which I had neglected to fill. And, you know, if you have 75,000 homeless people living in tents in downtown LA, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And, you know, if you have people dying of gang violence, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. It just doesn't matter. You can fill in that blank with any complex social vexing dilemma. If that persists, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. So I think it's kind of a helpful guide, you know. And if we remembered it, you know, would we have 75,000 homeless sleeping on the street? No. I mean, because it's kind of that's how powerful a notion it is.
You've written a book, Barking to the Choir, The Power of Radical Kinship. And one of the notions, the idea of otherizing people. You don't believe that there is the other.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Recently, I was on a plane, and I was in my aisle seat in the exit row with two homies, and I see this guy boarding, and he's wearing a T-shirt. He's very tall, and I'm trying to figure out what's the T-shirt say, and I can read it, and it says, and we were in Philadelphia. It says, "Philly is everybody." And I remember thinking, wow, how great kinship, connection, community of cherished belonging, mutuality. And as the T-shirt got closer, it said, "Philly versus everybody." And I went, oh shoot, we were so close there. You know, and that's kind of the notion, you know. How do we arrive at nobody versus anybody? But it's a good gauge. It's how you catch yourself. If you're demonizing anybody, if you're otherizing anybody, if you're kind of relegating somebody to be outside the circle of compassion, all these things are the opposite of how God sees. And so, how do you maintain the integrity of that, where there is no us and them, there's just us. And so, I would maintain that God's dream come true is not that people worship God, but that we be one. That's God's dream come true, a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. That's the whole ball game. And so everything is inching its way to that. Even here at Homeboy, healing is kind of the primary thing. Everything is secondary. But what's the point of healing? The point of healing is then to create and nurture into being a community of cherished belonging. So that's the fruit of your own personal healing and coming to terms with whatever was done to you or whatever you did, and then moving on to what? To creating a culture and a community where no one is left out.
How do you measure healing? Is there a metric for it?
Healing is never about so much a moral judgment. It's about a health assessment. And so everybody is on a continuum of 2 steps forward, 8 steps backwards. We're all crazy here at Homeboy Industries. Thank God we're not all crazy on the same day. So nobody's well until everybody's well. And so you're trying to walk each other home to wholeness. And we all have an experience that's human of being fractured and broken and wounded and traumatized. And so we're moving towards not holiness. I mean, holiness is being whole. Somebody told me the other day, which I'd never heard before, in the scripture, Jesus says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. But the Aramaic is not perfect, it's whole. Be whole. When you think about that, then you go, yeah, I like that, It's all interchangeable. Holy, healthy, whole. It's all the same thing. And if you measure it against your own experience, nobody has ever met a holy person who wasn't healthy and whole. And nobody's met a whole person who wasn't holy. And I think it's how it works. And unfortunately, there's been this moral overlay that's never helped us. And it's never kept us moral, it's just kept us from each other. So where we say these are good people and these are bad people. And it's just not how God sees. God sees God's people, period. After a recent shooting, I remember I read a bishop who said, sacred scripture clearly states that God stands with the victims and not the victimizers. And I go, I suppose he could prove that by going to some text. But the day won't ever come when that point of view aligns itself to the energies of God, the God of love. And once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods, as the great Mirabai star says. So you want to align the compass of your heart to the God we actually have, the one who doesn't see victim or victimizers, just sees sons and daughters. And can always, the homies here say, find the thorn underneath. How do you get underneath what just happened? Knowing that violence is a language. What language is it speaking? And they're adept at that here. Because gang members know, is this the language of a lethal absence of hope? Or is this the language of severe trauma? Or is this the language of mental illness? Because then once you know that, then you infuse hope, or you help heal damage, or you deliver mental health services. So how you name things is about as important a thing as can be.
So much is done in the name of Scripture or the Quran or any holy book. It is used often to create otherness, to create war. That's been as long as any recorded history shows us. How do you reconcile that? And what does one do about that with people of deep faith who do things that certainly don't reflect a God of love?
A homie who writes me every morning, we email each other, we look at the readings of the day and from scripture, and then we just, whoever gets up first writes a little thing. And he wrote and said, we need a mystical lens, a filter where you can read the scripture in such a way and say, yes, yes, no, I don't believe that. Yes, yes, no, that's completely off. So you encounter in scripture a wrathful God and you go, no, the day won't ever come when God is wrathful. Or they'll try to temper it. They'll say, God who is slow to anger. I say, well, no, God is no to anger. So it's all human projection and natural. But it requires a filter now, a mystical filter. Once you know the God of love, you sift out these things that aren't aligned with the God we actually have. And so this same homie who I call my spiritual director, he wrote not long ago, love is never a false doctrine, which I thought was pretty good, And one day, I think they were talking about forgiveness. And he says, I'm uncomfortable with forgiveness because there's too much waiting. Apology offered after a wait, apology accepted after a wait. He says, there's too much back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. He said, I just believe in fourth, which I thought was brilliant. And then he said, fourth is mercy, and God is mercy. And so, like this kind of notion of no waiting, it's like the father running down the road once he sees his son he thought was dead, and he's already planning the fatted calf banquet, and he doesn't want an apology. He just wants to welcome his kid. That's what it is. So it comes to a place once you know who that God is, then you can't otherize. You can't demonize. You're human, so you have to catch yourself. But we're all walking each other home to health and wholeness, because none of us are well till all of us are well. I was in Chicago Midway Airport, and I see this very young woman, and it was right after that man had assaulted the aged Asian woman on the streets of San Francisco, whenever that was, a couple of years maybe now, during pandemic, I think. And she was wearing a t-shirt that said, love, not hate. And I remember looking at it, and I thought, if I wore a shirt like that, it would be about me, and it can't be about me. And oddly, it's why we don't make progress, because it still otherizes. It says, I stand with the people who love, and I'm really defiantly against those who hate, which is to say, there are people who don't belong to us. But in the same airport, I see an older woman, and she's wearing a t-shirt, and it says, unwell. And I thought, finally, progress.
Can you be whole? Can you be holy in your view and not believe in God?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because again, I think being holy is about being healthy. And healthy people are loving people, and God is love. So for me, there's no contradiction in that at all. People are, that's the measure. The measure is, are you loving? And the only people who can pull off being loving and cherishing are healthy people. So you want to remove the obstacles, and you want the blindfold to fall, and you want people to, you can't really love goodness, as the prophet Micah says, unless you love, love goodness in here. You can't love goodness out there. And it's kind of a prerequisite. And so the Dalai Lama, who I was privileged to meet, and somebody asked him on BBC, I was channel surfing, and they said, well, what's the mark of authentic religion? And he thought about it a second, and he kind of repeats it back, the question, and his English is kind of clunky. And he said, the mark and measure is, he put both hands over his chest, and he said, warm-heartedness. And I thought, well, that's it. It's not about adherence to anything, it's just warm-heartedness. And he understood that in two ways. One is kind of your own self-knowledge, and then it's a warm-heartedness that has to go out into the world and be warm-hearted there. And so Gandhi said, I have chosen to be a disciple of Jesus. And he not once stopped being a Hindu. And so that was kind of the idea. It's about warm-heartedness, it's about love. It's not about adherence to a belief system. And so can you pull this off? Can you pull off holiness without believing in God? We have so many examples.
What you just said is enormously helpful, because we know that there are a lot of people who have an obstacle. They either believe in a different God, and there's enmity that comes from a disagreement over which God, or they believe in no God, and they're told that they are evil and bad for not believing in the God of their family or the God of their community.
Yeah, I just don't buy it. Because I think that the God we actually have is spacious and wild, as Meister Eckhart used to say, who was, a mystic and a theologian. And he said, it's a lie any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. So, if you get to a place where, the God you have is puny and judgmental and quick to be angry or ever angry, then, your God is too small. And so I don't know, I think it's important to always imagine a God that's spacious and expansive. And that's important because I think there's nothing more consequential than your notion of God. If your God is puny, then you have to be. If your God is spacious, then you'll be intimately welcoming and generous. And so you discover the generosity of God, and then you choose to be that generosity in the world. That's how it works. You receive the tender glance, and then you become the tender glance. You notice the notice of God, and then you become the notice of God in the world. So, it's so expansive, but it's not difficult, because you get to a place, by definition, heaven is the place that you want to spend eternity in. And if it's, a God who's judgmental and, kind of a jerk, then nobody wants to spend eternity there. And that's how you know that chances are God is not a jerk.
Well,
I've never uttered that sentence before, but that's what I mean.
We do take a moment and make reference to, you want to have the Westboro Baptist Church people protesting at your funeral.
In this very office, there was a young woman named Nellie who has had all the worst things befall her kids taken away, abuse of every imaginable kind, prison, gang members, sold drugs, used drugs. And I stand in awe at what she's had to carry in her lifetime, rather than in judgment at how she's carried it. And so she's sitting in front of my desk back there, and I don't know, she has a light bill she has to pay or something, so I'm writing a check to help her out, and she leans, with her chin resting on her fists in front of my desk, and she says, "Gee, I wish you were God." And I laughed. I said, "Why?" And she goes, and her eyes well up with tears, and she says, "I think you'd let me into heaven." And that just broke my heart in two. And I stopped writing the check, and I leaned and I grabbed her hands and I pulled her in. And I looked her in the eye and I said, if I get to heaven and you're not there, I'm not staying. And I believe that, you know. So do I think anybody's in hell? No, I don't think it exists. Or as the mystics say, maybe it exists, but it's empty. And do I think everybody's going to be welcomed in? Yeah, just because, you know, I'm nobody, but you know enough to welcome people here at this place. There's nobody who's unwelcome. And how much more so God?
One of the communities that has been told it is not welcome is the LGBTQ community. And that's been particularly true in the Catholic Church. And I wonder how you see that, and how, because a number of people of the LGBTQ community feel like they've been told from birth that they're damned and can never be redeemed, and do everything they can to prove otherwise, and often in a bad way. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, again, everybody's unshakably good, and we belong to each other. And so, my notion of who God is welcoming of everybody. And again, it's just, some of it is just psychology and ignorance, and how do people not understand things. God loved Jesus, and I do, but he thought the guy having seizures was possessed by a demon, and he wasn't. He had epilepsy. And so I don't hold that against Jesus. He knew as best as anybody in the audience knew, who were watching him cure this guy. I don't doubt that. But that it's a good parallel to stuff, because we think there are demons, and there aren't any. They're just people who belong to us. And nobody chooses to be LGBTQ. It's like being right-handed or left-handed. So it's kind of a silly thing. But I acknowledge the pain that the Catholic Church has, in fact, caused over 2,000 years. I mean, how are you going to deny that? You just can't. And again, this doesn't have anything to do with morality, except for the fact that it's not moral to exclude. So Jesus took four things seriously: inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. And if members of the LGBTQ community do not feel welcomed by people of Catholic faith or Christian beliefs, then it just means we're not taking seriously what Jesus took seriously. Now, would I bet my entire life and salvation on that statement? Of course I would. Of course I would. Because once you know the God of love, you just go, no, this is a God who welcomes everybody. But it's a challenging belief, just because, recently in Lake Arrowhead, a man killed a woman who was flying a flag, a pride flag. And that woman belonged to us. And that man who did that also. And so that's the challenge, because you just say, at a previous time somebody might have thought he was possessed by a demon. But no, he clearly was mentally ill. And this is clear, clear, clear. And nobody chooses to be mentally ill. Mental illness chooses them. And so the minute you make it into some kind of moral thing, we get stopped in our tracks, and then we're not able to move beyond. We just shake our fists, and rather than say, people belong to us, and people are carrying pain. And I don't know, I'm old-fashioned. I'd like to make progress, And we don't make progress when we denounce truthfully. We get stuck. As opposed to saying, how do we roll up our sleeves? How do we notice? How do we recognize signs of people who are leaving internet breadcrumbs that they're racists, or that they're homophobes, or that they're xenophobes. All those things are indicators. They all point beyond themselves to the fact that people aren't whole. Well, how do we walk each other home to wholeness, rather than just say, you're part of the them and you don't belong to us?
It's so interesting you raise this with social media, because obviously you and I are of the same era where it didn't exist. And now in this century, it is ubiquitous. People communicate without ever seeing each other. In some ways that can make it very easy to otherize, because you can do so anonymously. If you were looking at this problem, these people who just, and many are clearly mentally ill, some are not. Some are choosing to follow Nazism. They've chosen white nationalism as a path. How do you suggest, because I think we're at an inflection point, dealing with that now? Because it seems to be a real phenomenon that wasn't there when you and I were growing up.
Yeah, I guess I would, does a healthy, whole person who is well, can that person be a fascist? No, they can't. I mean, that's an impossible notion. And so that's why it's important to talk about, none of us are well until all of us are well. Because nobody chooses to be unwell. We're all born wanting the same things. And then something happens. And I know this from working with gang members for 40 years. Something happens, trauma, a despair that's bleak, or bona fide diagnosable mental illness. But mental illness, you don't choose it. Nobody chooses it. And it chooses you. And I can't explain how that happens. But I remember I was talking with somebody, they were talking about, a public figure who she was saying was a racist. And I said, well, these are indicators. They point beyond themselves, racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, xenophobe, homophobe. These are all pointing beyond themselves to a condition that needs addressing. And she was a therapist, and she said, oh, by the way, racism is not a mental illness. And then I looked at her, I said, what else would it be? I mean, what else would it be? And then it reduces us to our third grade mind that says it's bad people doing bad things. I go, what else would it be? Of course it's mental illness. But people get tripped up by the diagnosis. A guy kills 50 people at a concert in Las Vegas, and they had to close the case after a year because we couldn't find the motive. I said, I knew the minute I heard that 50 people were killed, this man is not well. He belongs to us. He was not well. They go, it can't be that, because we couldn't find a file in a psychiatrist's office. I go, yeah, I think you might have missed him. And we might have missed it. And so I don't know. I think that's that's a moment, because we get forced back to this binary thing that says there are good people and there are bad people. And because there aren't, then you have to say, yeah, I've never met a homophobe who was healthy, who was whole. Doesn't touch their goodness, but I've never met anybody who held that view who was whole. And then I'm not sure we can say that somebody chooses not to be well. And even if you say, well, they're not cooperating with their own healing, well, that's a different thing. It just means that people's agency is compromised. It's hard for them. Because I see this here, and it's difficult. You go, well, okay, you need to be in recovery. You need to be talking to somebody, a therapist, And you need to take your meds. If you stop taking your meds, it's going to go haywire. And sometimes they don't, cooperate. And so, and that's tricky, but it's still agency that's compromised. But I don't think people choose to be unwell. I think it happens.
We talked to Dolores Huerta, who almost died having been brutally beaten by the police at a protest in San Francisco, and is now 93 and remains in the fight, in a good way, remains in the struggle, la causa. You've met her. Can you speak to that indefatigability of Dolores and people like her?
Yeah, Dolores Huerta, like Cesar Chavez, like the Dalai Lama, people, I've been like Pope Francis, people you're in the presence of who know how to put first things recognizably first, and they know how to live as though the truth were true, and I think I kind of believe in people who extend the invitation, because an indictment is just otherizing, but invitation is always pulling people in. You pull people into la lucha, you pull people into the struggle, you pull people in to stand in the lowly place, as St. Ignatius of Loyola would say. You pull people in to kind of be anchored in loving goodness and choosing to be just. But you can't love goodness or be just if there isn't a fundamental healing that's happened in your life. So I think that's important. How do you help each other see? We're always loaning our glasses and our lenses so that people can kind of approximate, how to set the compass of their own hearts, how to align their energies with the energy of the God who loves us without measure and without regret. But it's difficult. It's really hard to catch ourselves because we want to strike a high moral distance, which in the end, if I did that, it's about me, and it can't be about me. But it also is about distance, and distance is the opposite of who God is. And so separation is an illusion. And so how do you always kind of promote an invitation to union and kinship?
And again, La Casa, Dolores, and Cesar were about community organizing and drawing people in, attracting people. You said this with Cesar. He made you feel like you're special. Dolores does that as well, yes?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Dolores Huerta is, and she's amazing, and I've never seen her not speak at any public event where she doesn't lead people into some kind of chant at the end of it, where they're all doing the farm worker clap, and it's just so delightful. But again, these are folks who are lights, but genuine lights are always wanting to point to the light that is in everything.
You talked about a man named Louis who had a dream with you in it, and he was in darkness. Can you tell that story?
So there's a homie I know named Lulu, and he was a gang member, and he was selling crack cocaine as they did in those days. And then he became his own best customer. Finally, I convinced him to go to rehab. He reluctantly agreed, and so he went to this place. I drove him to this place in the hills above Los Angeles, and 30 days in, his younger brother did something that gang members never do. He put a gun to his head and took his own life. So I called Lulu and I told him, and of course he was devastated. And I said, look, I'm going to pick you up for the funeral, but I'm going to drive you right back to the rehab. And he goes, I want you to. I like how recovery feels. So I go pick him up. He gives me a big abrazo, and he gets in the car and he says, I had a dream last night and you were in it. And he said we were in like a classroom-sized room, but there were no windows, no lights, no illuminated exit signs, no light creeping under the door. It was just pitch black. And I know you're there, he tells me, but you're silent, and so am I. And so he says that in the silence, I reach into my pocket and I have a flashlight, and I pull it out and I aim it steadily on the light switch on the wall. And as he tells me the dream, he says, I know I'm the only one who can turn that light switch on. I'm really glad that you happen to have a light switch, flashlight. And so he follows the beam of light steadily until he, with great trepidation, stands in front of the light switch, and he takes a deep breath. And he flips the light on, and the room is flooded with light, and now he's sobbing in the telling of the story. And he says, the light is better than the darkness. Like he didn't know that to be the case. And then he said, I guess my brother just never found the light switch. Well, I've never had an experience like that in my 69 years of living, that in an instant my whole life changed. I changed everything, how I was doing things. And I'm probably 10 years into this work, and I just stopped. I realized that I had been trying to turn the light switch on for people, and you can't do it. And I probably was always perilously close to burnout, and I've never been since because of that dream that he told me. And then I just stopped, and it wasn't about me, and it wasn't about fixing or saving or rescuing or saving anybody. It was just being content with the fact that everybody owns a flashlight and everybody knows where to aim it. And none of us are well until all of us are well. So help people aim the flashlight in the general direction of the light switch. And watch people who will respond to that invitation. Step towards the light switch, and then they'll find their agency to be able to do that.
Homeboy, which started a great mother being necessity, first schooling, then jobs. You tried a lot of different things, including, and I should have thought that you would have learned this from Nixon, plumbing. and
Right, 70,
can you explain some of the things?
Homeboy? Yeah, sure. So Homeboy Industries, we've now evolved from that time when we started a school and a jobs program. We've now evolved. Nobody kind of thought this up, much less me, but we've backed our way into now becoming the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. So 10,000 folks a year walk through our doors here wanting to reimagine their lives, And all of them come barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. But healing is kind of the centerpiece. So it's 18-month training program. But it's mainly time to kind of dedicate yourself to your own work, And so we have therapy and free tattoo removal and 13 social enterprises, justice enterprises, if you will, bakery, restaurants. We have a diner at City Hall, the only place you can get food. We have 2 restaurants at 2 terminals at LAX, Homeboy Electronic Recycling, and 13 altogether. And so, but more than anything is the culture, homies and homegirls walk through the doors, and they come with what a psychologist would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was frightening or frightened. And you can't really calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. So the place is a safe place where folks feel seen, and then they can feel cherished. We have so many who've done 20, 30. We have somebody who 47 years in prison. And, they will say, we're used to being watched. but we're not used to being seen, and so that's kind of the liberating thing, is to be seen. And then they, sort of something of a sanctuary, and then they become the sanctuary that they sought here. And then they go home and they present that sanctuary to their kids, and suddenly you've broken a cycle, and so that's kind of how it works.
Can you tell the story of how the tattoo removal process began?
Many years ago, I was sitting at my desk at another office, previous headquarters, and a guy comes in named Frank, who I'd never met before, and he was just 2 days out of Corcoran State Prison. And he was sitting in front of my desk, and among his many tattoos on his face was bold black Old English letters on his forehead that said "fuck the world." And he looked at me and he said, I am having a hard time finding a job. And I said, well, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this one. And so I hired him naturally. And so he bagged bread. I remember that was his job. He would just bag loaves of bread. And then at White Memorial Hospital, I found a doctor named Dr. Jack Lenore, who had a laser machine. And I coaxed him into giving me an hour a month to chip away at Frank's forehead and a few others. And then in no time, I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted the same treatment, so we couldn't stay with that arrangement. But I always add that currently he's a security guard at a movie studio, probably not that employed at the moment, but with the strike. But he's, and there is no trace left of the angriest, dumbest thing he'd ever done. Proving, as they say, that all of us are a whole lot more than the worst things we've ever done.
The one thing that we had hoped to see, and we might when we come back, is Fabian, am I saying it right,
Deborah, yeah.
And the art studio. Can you talk about that?
The Art Academy.
The Art Academy,
Homeboy
yes.
Art Academy, founded by Fabian Deborah, who came through the program here and was a drug counselor here, but he was always just an extraordinary artist. So that's part of his dream. And our dream, too, at Homeboy is to somehow marry his gift and add it to a way to invite others who are equally gifted. And then to use it as a means to heal folks through the graphic arts. But he's an astounding muralist and artist.
And there is an art academy. There's a physical space.
Yeah, so we have 3 locations here, really, in terms of our youth reentry center, our headquarters here, and the Homeboy Art Academy that he directs.
What music gives you joy? How does music touch you, and can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm kind of stuck in our generation, I mean, a little bit, but I'm kind of, I'm such a news junkie that's kind of what I listen to all the time, and a political junkie. So that kind of takes precedence over actually listening to music. But I'll retrieve, from the 70s, Joni Mitchell and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and the Stones, and the Beatles. So I can retrieve those things. So, but I don't really stay up on music, or even listen to radio, or have, I don't even know how to talk about it.
Here's some news. There's no radio anymore.
I was trying to say playlist.
I don't know how to break
really
this
know.
to you. It came as a shock to me because I did radio for years.
Yeah.
But when
There
you hear
is no such thing.
there is no such thing. But if you say that, try saying the word transistor to someone born. When you listen to Joni Mitchell, when you listen to the Stones, the Beatles, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, it touches something in you. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, because I can, I can just, now you can just go to YouTube and have something playing, like Woodstock, or the White Album, or all these things, from my youth, that, kind of brings you back. But, like concerts or who does music now, Yeah, boy, I'm not so much. So I don't know anything.
I'm going to out you. You're a hippie.
I'm
You're an
a,
old
I'm,
hippie.
I'm an old hippie. Guilty as charged. But I'm also a geezer, and so I don't really know how all these things work. Homies have to. So they were changing my Siri voice to this Irish woman. They say, "What voice do?" Well, what are my options? Well, Irish. I go, "Yeah, do it." And so I was giving a homily, and out of my left pocket, I was right up. There's a pause in the middle of my preaching, and this Irish beautiful voice says, "I do not understand what you're saying." I said, "Well, join the damn club," and I powered her off. But she gives me directions, and I'm so glad that they did that, because she'll say turn into the car park and all these things that remind me of our relatives from Ireland. And my favorite thing, in fact, I'm hoping to title my next book about it, is when she'll say accident ahead. And then there's this pause and you wait. And she says, you're still on the fastest route. And I love it. I'm consoled by it. I think, oh, how great. I'm still on the fastest route. I don't even think it means you're on the quickest route, but it's the surest route. You know you're going to get there. And so that's kind of, I think love, it's still the fastest route. It's still going to get you to exactly where you want to get, especially at this time where there's such a tribalism and polarizing and huge gulfs and divisions that, love, it's still the fastest route. Love never ends, and love never fails, and love never stops loving. These are all translations of the road to love has no end. Translations of the 1 Corinthians, love never fails. There are different translations. But the First Nations translation is the road of love has no end.